Hello and welcome to part 4 of the Midwest 916 restoration project. We've been making progress. Some things are getting taken care of here. We've done some cabinet work. I've been jumping back and forth between items as parts come in and as I find time. But this video will bring you up to date on some of the items I've been handling. I hope somebody finds this interesting or at least a little bit helpful. Without further ado, we'll jump right into it. I'm going to work on these grills that are in front of the grill cloth. And please excuse the dehumidifier in the background. We've had some really humid days here lately, and I don't want things getting either mildewed or rusty down here. And now I've got to figure out where I put the other one. Oh, there it is. Have it. Both the radio and the replacement speaker had one of these with them, and they both had the same issue. A lot of these spot welds had broken, and some of these wires were only held on with a single spot weld. So I took these out in the garage and brazed them back together where the spot welds were broken. I could have gone out and purchased an inexpensive spot welder, but because of this low thermal mass, there's not a lot of mass here. You don't even need the oxyacetylene to braze these. Just pick up some inexpensive brazing rod at the local home improvement store, and your standard propane torch that you use for soldering plumbing will do the job quite nicely. Very low thermal mass. It'll heat right up and the brazing rod will take to it. I've got them clamped down here so that they won't run around, and I'm going to try wire brushing these. And that's taking everything right off nicely. There's something to be said for these brushless drills. These things have a lot of RPM and torque behind them. So I'm going to wire brush this all up. I'll give it a coat of primer, and then I've got two different paints that I'm thinking of using. I have what they call brass metallic, and of course it never comes out looking like the cap. And I have this champagne bronze that I did another radio with. It came out looking real nice, and the champagne is looking a lot more like what's on this one than the brass one does, but I'll do one of each and determine at that time which one I'm going to use on the radio. I've got a feeling it'll end up being the champagne bronze, but we'll see. But rather than have you sit here and watch me do this for the next 25 minutes, I'll just show you the end result. I have two of these rigid drills. They use the same batteries, the same 18-volt batteries. This is an old-timer. I believe they said this was a 4-brush motor when I bought it, and it has a ton of torque. But that's as fast as it spins. Now, I built a huge 12 by 14 shed with a loft and everything else with this thing. Screwed it all together instead of nailing it for the most part. That way I could take it apart and move it at some point if I had to. The whole thing was done with sheetrock screws of various lengths. And I bought this at the time they had a promotion. It came with 2 batteries, and the batteries came with a lifetime guarantee. As long as I kept the paperwork for the guarantee, I can get the batteries replaced at any time. These are years old at this point. I'm going to say 7, still going strong. But then they had the same deal on another one, and it was this brushless unit. And I'm here to tell you, there's no comparison. This is still a great drill, but this thing, the RPM, I don't know what the top speed on this thing is, but it just, and the torque is incredible. It's a three-phase brushless motor, and it is just a beast This thing in low range, they both have a low range, but if you don't watch it, this thing will take your wrist off. If a bit binds up, I have the handle assembly for it that, you know, clamps around here and comes out the side. If I'm drilling big holes, I use it because this thing will hurt you. Love both of these though. Great drills. But this baby, I'm telling you, it has made short work of this. It just cleaned it up and nothing flat. Alrighty. They've been wire brushed, primered. We'll let that dry overnight, get good and dry, and then tomorrow we'll come down here and give these a coat, one each of the brass, shiny brass or whatever that's called, and then the champagne bronze is the other one. You can tell I eat a lot of tuna fish. It's probably what's wrong with my brain, all the mercury. Anyhow, that's where it stands at the moment. Yeah, that's covered. It's just getting dry. It's hard to tell. Painting something like this is a chore. You've got to make sure you get all the way around the wires on both sides, and I hate painting stuff like this, but about half a can just doing these two pieces. But they're covered. Okay, we've got the paint on these grills, and it's interesting. This is the one with the very shiny cap, and it's rather dull and flat looking. Doesn't pop. This one has the cap that shows a much more subdued finish, greeny finish. It's the one that was on these I had one of these from 1947 and one from 1948. I think this is the one from 48. I'd have to look inside. Has a little more gloss, but it's a much nicer finish. I think this is going to look great against the grill cloth. So that's the one I'm going to go with, is the one that's on this radio. And this paint, by the way, matched the original perfectly. It just, I had sprayed initially part of one of these after I straightened out all the dents. This is a piece of sheet metal. Sprayed a piece, masked, you know, put a piece of paper and looked at the color, and I couldn't hardly tell the difference between this and the original paint that was on here. By the way, these AC battery sets are awesome.
I would vote for a Republican who made his or her priority.
But that's got to be close to 15 pounds. Carrying that around all day with a full pack of batteries in it must have been fun. But I think I'm going to go with this one for the finish on the speaker grill, or the grill that's in front of the grill cloth. And we'll call that done. A couple other things. Let me show you another item. Okay, Mike at Midwest Radio contacted me. You remember this mess with the two holes. He has several of these radios that he's parting out, and contacted me and said he had one of these. He said it had some scratches in it, and it's got some very minor scratches over here. This stuff will buff out. This thing looks awesome. No holes in the front of it. Just in beautiful condition. These very, very minor scratches will buff out. The way he had said it, I was expecting horrible deep gouges across the front. He was worried about your parents, but Mike, I gotta tell you, this thing came out beautiful. We'll clean that up, we'll mount that. Now, I haven't given up working on this, but I'm gonna feel a lot more comfortable attacking this thing and seeing what I can do with it now that I have one for the radio that's going to, you know, replace it. I won't worry so much about how this is going to come out. I'll have a chance to experiment and do some stuff, and we'll do that together. I'll show you how I make all my mistakes. And oh, another thing over here. Does anybody know how to get a good stripper today? The stuff they sell at the home improvement store is crap. Back in the day when I was refinishing stuff, I'd go down, buy some stripper, brush it or spray it on. 10 minutes later, the finish was off. The part was clean and ready to, you know, to sand or paint or prime or whatever. This stuff has been on here now for 24 hours. And let me get a scraper. Hang on. Okay, got my furniture scraper, and I played with this one in the laser too when I got the new IR head. 24 hours, one layer is coming off. Absolutely horrible. It's just going to make a big gooey mess, and I'm still going to have to go at this again. Sanding is going to take me a month of Sundays. I think I'm going to go down to the home improvement store and buy one of those heat guns. Now I have a heat gun for heat shrink, but it's not going to do the job. It doesn't make it doesn't produce enough heat. I'm going to see how that works on here. But at this rate, I don't have enough hours left in my life to refinish this thing. This is just painful. Just painful. So, what do you guys use for getting off old finishes? It's just so disheartening these days to try to find something. I'm all for the ecology. I'm all for, you know, saving the planet. These products don't work. They just don't work. How we're supposed to, you know, you end up with 10 times more goo than you would if the product worked. If the product worked, I'd do this once, I'd be finished. It appears the solution would be a 1,000-gallon tank full of lacquer thinner and just throw this thing in it and let it soak for an hour. I dumped lacquer thinner on the top on areas where it didn't even have any of the stripper on it, and within a couple minutes it started softening up and coming off. However, I'm not going to be able to do that inside the house. I'm going to have to take this thing outside to finish this job. Up the stairs and out. What meager quantity of brain cells I have left at my age will be quickly depleted with the fumes this is producing. Not to mention, I've got to find some gloves that will work. I've got several different kinds of rubber gloves here, and this stuff just eats them up. So I'm going to have to see what they've got at the home improvement store. I'll buy a couple more gallon cans instead of these small ones of lacquer thinner. And I'll just stand it up on end and put a pool of lacquer thinner on the sides, let it work it for a few minutes, and then scrape it off with the scraper. After this stuff sits on it for 5 or 10 minutes, it just comes right off. But again, the fumes are going to do me in. We have a tropical storm coming through here tonight and tomorrow. So this will be off the table for a couple of days. But once that's passed, I'll get the neighbor to help me carry this thing up the stairs and outside, and I'll work on it outside. Okay, I'm finally working up the, I don't know what to call it, ambition, courage to attack the cabinet work. Those of you who've been watching my videos for a long time know that I am not a tree carcass guy. I don't have the mad skills of the David Tiptons or even the Buzz 1151s to just dive into the wood. But I'm going after it because I want this piece of furniture, this radio, to live again for another 74 years at least. Now, this stuff I got at the local home improvement store, absolutely worthless. All this did is make a huge gooey mess. I went on a 20-minute rant and I'm not even going to publish it. It just, I was so upset by the time I got through using this. 4 hours in, it had done nothing. I covered it as they recommended on the back and let it sit for 24 hours, and it still hadn't eaten through the finish. You know, I tried furniture scraping, I tried sanding. It was going to take me months to get through the varnish that was on here. This stuff, don't waste your time. Doesn't do a damn thing. It just makes a big gooey mess. And I sniffed around a couple of the home improvement places until I found this stuff. It wasn't cheap. This cut through it in about 20 minutes. Most of it. It still was gooey, messy, but it cut through the finish on both sides. I only initially started on the top surface, but on both sides of these doors. This did the trick. Still a big gooey mess. But after I got done with that, I attacked it by pouring lacquer thinner on the surface and working at it, and it cleaned up. What you see here is the result. I haven't done any sanding. All this is the remaining stain that stayed in the surface, which I'm fine with. I'll do some light sanding, restain everything, and then put a good coat of clear on top of it when I'm done. These have cleaned up fairly nicely. I wish I had a 1,000-gallon tank of lacquer thinner, because I found the lacquer thinner itself would do a beautiful job if you let it soak for 10 or 15 minutes. It will actually clean the varnish off, but lacquer thinner is mighty expensive, and with my diminishing supply of brain cells, I shouldn't be inhaling too many of the fumes. I finally found a pair of neoprene gloves that would stand up to the lacquer thinner. It does make them a little sticky, but the other gloves, rubber gloves I was using, literally evaporated in 2 minutes with the lacquer thinner. These so far are holding up. These are made out of black neoprene, and they seem to be doing the job. The top surface here, I've gone over it after I went over it with the stripper. I'm going over it again with the lacquer thinner, and it's cleaning it up. So I've got a process now that'll get these cleaned up and I'll get it sanded. When I finish stripping off the finish, then I'll go on to do the gluing of the places that are becoming slightly delaminated, and I will show you that entire process. You've seen hundreds of people do stripping, but this is all about, don't bother with the citrus strip on these old finishes. This stuff here, this still doesn't work as good as the stuff I used 20 years ago. The stuff I used 20 years ago, by the time you got through brushing it on, the surface had bubbled up and was ready to clean off. But thanks to the EPA, and I'm all for protecting the environment, but if you've got products that just don't work, that other stuff might be okay for, what do you call it, latex paint, or stuff that's put down fairly recently. But you need something far more aggressive to take care of this 74-year-old varnish. That's where this part of the cabinet's at, and we'll keep picking at this over the next couple of days and finish getting this stripped. Will the final finish go on before I have to leave? Jury's out on that. But whenever I've got a few minutes, I'm down here picking at it. And here's an area where my utter lack of woodworking knowledge leaves me somewhat flummoxed. There's some kind of a defect here that obviously had some kind of wood filler in it. And over the years, I've tried playing occasionally with wood filler, and it always stains up differently than the parent material, even if I try to pre-tint it. But there's a divot here in the finish, and you can see it went from here to here to, well, I'm still picking filler out of here. I've been trying to sand this over a long, broad area to try to blend it in, but that's pretty deep. So I know the woodworkers out there are giggling at me right now going, what a dummy, but it is what it is. There's obviously was some kind of defect that was filled, and I'm guessing that was at the factory because it was apparently or appeared to be under the original finish. So I guess I'm going to look around for a tinted wood filler and try to fill that back in and sand it to blend. So I'll go back to the home improvement store, and rather than try to sand this completely out, because I'll end up with a big swale in here if I try to take that all the way down, I'll try to find a tinted wood filler that's going to match. I think I'm going to go with a dark cherry on this. The doors appear to be a cherry color, as does this. Now I don't know what the camera's showing it as, but it's a fairly dark reddish tinted finish. So I'll see if I can find some wood filler pre-tinted and fill that in and try to blend it in as best I can. And here's another area that kind of makes my blood run cold. If I put stripper on here, I'm going to end up with a gooey mess inside of all of this detail, as well as here. It's going to be just horrific to clean up, even with a brush, a stiff brush. This is fairly easy. This I can do with 4/0 steel wool and some lacquer thinner. And what I'm going to do here, I think, is go over this with 220 sandpaper and take the flat surfaces off. The finish that's down inside of here, I think would add, even if it doesn't exactly match the final finish, I don't think it'll look bad to have a bit of contrast between the top of this and what's inset here. Again, if I had a 1,000-gallon tank of lacquer thinner, I'd just throw this whole cabinet in and let it soak for 4 or 5 hours and then rinse it off and it would all be gone. But having worked with this paint remover or finish remover, even the clean strip, it just leaves this gooey mass. Cleaning up the detailing, the beading on those front panels, the door panels, took me several hours with a fine scraper or small wire brush and just working it over and over and over. This just, the thought of having to clean all of that out. We'll see how it works out. I know people out there, by the time they see this, are going to have 1,000 ideas, but by the time they see this, I'll have done the job already. We'll see what I come up with. I'll let you know. Okay, I don't know how well this is going to come out on camera. In the viewfinder, it doesn't look very good, but a simple furniture scraper on here seems to be taking this off quite nicely. I had very little success doing this on the top of the cabinet. It was hard as nails, but this is very brittle. And most of this is coming right off the surface. I don't know about in here. Let's see what it does in here, if anything. Yes, it's going to come out fairly easily as well without stripper. I can finish with some lacquer thinner and some 4/0 steel wool in here. And incidentally, the rolled edge that's in here, 4/0 steel wool and lacquer thinner did a beautiful job. It left a nice finish on the wood, and the lacquer finish came right off very quickly with 4/0 steel wool and some lacquer thinner. There's a few spots that the tool isn't getting into, but I'll give this a sand on the top. I'll start probably with something like a 320 and or maybe I'll go with a 220. Smooth this out. It should get the remainder of the high spots clear, and I think the low spots will be fine once the stain gets in here, and I think it'll be good. We'll find out. And again, by the time you see this, this will be done. So I know the comments will be hot and heavy, but go ahead and throw them in there, because next time maybe you can make my job a little bit easier. Well, this is turning out not to be nearly as bad as I had feared. A small wire brush is cleaning up this beading very nicely. The furniture scraper is removing the finish that's here with relative ease without making the mess that the stripper does. It's cleaning it right out. Something's different about this finish versus the top and the door panels. The door panels and the top, this thing wouldn't touch it. Now I'm wondering if somebody redid the top and the door panels at one time with a different type of lacquer or something. But the finish that's in here is coming out with relative ease. It just scrapes right off. A little bit of sanding with some 220 when I'm done here, and restaining, and then varnish. This is going to be fine. This is cleaning up relatively easy. In fact, if I just do this, you can see the finish is flaking right off. I'm not applying any pressure. I'm just running it over the surface, and it's removing it. So that's going to go a lot better than I thought. I was in panic mode when I saw all of this stuff, but again, no experience at this. Not my forte. I'm a nuts and bolts, sheet metal welded type of guy. But I don't think this is going to be nearly as bad as I'd feared. Okay, this job is going very well. This stuff is just stripping right off and leaving a finish ready to be sanded. Producing a lot of dust. I can deal with dust. I've got a vacuum cleaner. It's a lot easier to deal with the dust than it is to deal with all of the goo left over from the stripper. I'm sure somebody out there is going to suggest that perhaps the top and the doors had been done in polyurethane at some time, but I've dealt with polyurethane and it certainly wasn't the case. My theory, and it's just a theory, the doors and the top, when the finish was stripped off, still maintained a lot of color. So I'm guessing the doors that went in here and the top of the cabinet, I think, were stained, and then a clear lacquer of some kind was put over the top, which was a much more durable finish than this. This, I believe, was a tinted stain. I believe the stain that they sprayed on the rest of this cabinet was probably pre-tinted and went on in one coat. And that's why this comes off so much easier than the top. The top was probably stained, the doors were probably stained and clear lacquered and then assembled on the cabinet later. They were done in the same color, but I think the fact that this went on in a single coat of stain, tinted stain, I mean, I'm pulling that off with my fingernails. That's cleaning up. And there's no stain underneath it, so I suspect this was done in two different operations. The doors and the top were probably done somewhere, and then everything else was just given a quick coat of tinted stain, tinted clear. That's my theory, and I'm sticking with it. And here we go again. I've been using this. This is for drywall or sheetrock, depending on what part of the country you're from. And it doesn't load up like regular sandpaper. And I've been using various diameters inside of the abrasive here to do this detailing work. And it makes short work of cleaning this up. because this doesn't load up. You can see when the stuff gets in it, and it cleans right out. So that makes short work of that. However, this side, for whatever reason, is like what I ran into on the doors and the top. Now the other side of this cabinet, I took my furniture scrapers and I do that, and I had clean wood. This side just doesn't want to come off, and yes, these are freshly burnished. They've got a nice edge on them, but they just don't want to come clean. That's unbelievable, and I'm bearing down on that with everything I got, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. The other side stripped like this did. I mean, it was just a simple, and you can see the finish just comes right off. But for whatever reason, this side versus the other side cleaned off in 10 minutes. I had the whole thing stripped and clean. And the bottom piece here, it was literally 4 passes. I put 4 passes and this was cleaned off. So I'm going to have to chemically strip this side, and I was hoping I wasn't going to have to do that. But we're going to put some chemical stripper on there. We'll get this side cleaned off. And then I got to get to the detail work on the inside. I've got most of the outside surfaces cleaned up. They'll be ready for sanding and a quick coat of stain. But we're going to have to chemically strip this side, and as much as I didn't want to do it, I don't think I've got any choice. I'll be here for a month of Sundays trying to scrape to do that. Most of what you see is sawdust. It just isn't coming off. I don't understand what's different about this side versus the other. Should be the same wood, should be the same finish, but it just will not come off. We're gonna get after it. And now that the strippers had a few minutes to work on it, it's just a big gooey mess. But at least the top layer is coming off. We'll probably do a second application. Although I found it at this point, lacquer thinner does a pretty good job of cleaning it up. Once I've broken through that top surface of whatever this side is finished with, you can see the goo that comes off of there. I really hate this part of the job. I know I do a lot of complaining, but not my thing. Now if I take lacquer thinner and dump it on there, most of the rest of this will clean up. Let me grab some paper towels here. And we'll dump a little thinner. Dump some lacquer thinner on here. And work that in. And it leaves the stain behind. I suspect the same thing happened here. They probably stained this first and then put the varnish on the top of it. I don't know. But all of the varnish is gone at this point. And 2 or 3 applications of this lacquer thinner cleans it up pretty much to where I can sand the rest. That's pretty much down to wood and stain at this point. And this is how I did the top and the doors. And they came out looking pretty nice after this. So that's what we're going to continue to do until this cabinet's cleaned up and we can restain it, everything. I still got to get in here and clean these out. I haven't done them yet. we have a process for that that works well. So that's what we're doing. Okay, we're at the point now where if I rub this with a lacquer thinner and a paper towel, it comes off almost clean. There's like nothing left, but this looks like it's been stained. The other side looked more like this when I got finished. You know, it's scraped clean. So what I'll do is let this completely dry and give this a light sanding, and then I'll just, you know, I'll sand everything up, treat everything with a conditioner, and then restain everything, I guess. But this piece is very different from the other side. The other side's bare wood, scraped right down to bare wood with the furniture scraper. This side has left behind. This is a good looking finish. If you know, this looks like it's ready for clear lacquer. It's incredibly good looking. There's no damage. It's clean. It's stained. And you know, I pour lacquer thinner on here and rub it with a paper towel at this point, and it barely comes off with any tint whatsoever. So I don't know what to make of that. Maybe the dead tree carcass guys out there know why. Maybe this was fixed at the factory. No, that doesn't make sense. I was going to say fixed at the factory, because this would have the stain on it. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Or maybe this was left over from something else and they pieced it together with new wood. Beyond me. But this panel, this piece here looks marvelous. It's smooth. It's dent and blemish free. It looks ready for clear lacquer. But we're going to carry on. We're going to clean up, do some sanding. I won't bore you with all of that. I'll be here for hours doing that. But just curious if anybody knows why. We've been doing a lot of sanding here for an hour or two. I'm taking a little break. There are some things I don't want to lose. There's an inspector's mark inside there, number 8. And if I move this camera back, tip this down. There's also the same inspector's mark down here. See if we can make it stand out. Number 8. Serial number up here, 3068. Up here, another inspector's mark, number 8. I don't know if that's sticking out clear, coming out clear. There's a number 2. And over here inside, we have somebody's initials. Probably old marks from the factory. I like to try to preserve those if I can. Now, there's a lot of dust in here right now. I'm not going to... Oh, there's an 18 here. 1-8. Down here, we have an 18 in pencil. I don't know if that's showing up. It's above the number 8. I darken up the number 8. The number 8 inspecting mark is here. And 1-8 is written in pencil. We have another number 8 here. I hope that's showing up on the camera. It's right behind. I don't know if the camera can see that or not. What I typically do with the inside of these are not finished inside, or they're semi-finished, if you will. I'll give these a coat of stain just to clean them up and make them look fresh. But we're not going to sand all that down. I'm going to try Howard's Restorer finish here and see how that works out. None of this is not visible. The radio goes right up to the front edge of this, so you can't even see this, but I'm going to go over it with Howard's, and it'll be the same thing with the turntable side over here. None of this is visible. The drawer will go right to the front edge, So that strip you see that's finished or semi-finished, I'll just go over that with stain or Howard's Restorer Finish and clean that up. And we'll give a complete, we'll go over this with Howard's, or, you know, again, a lighter stain just to clean up the wood so that it looks good. But while I'm taking a break from sanding, I think what I'm going to do right now, because it'll have to be sanded afterwards and cleaned up, is I'm going to address this. You can see where it's come delaminated here. So we're going to go over that, and I'm going to show you how I repair these, and I'm going to do that from the inside. It's going to involve drilling some small holes. Let me grab some. Okay, I've shown this before, but for those that haven't seen it, I have various syringes. Now these are not medical type syringes. These are blunt, absolutely blunt on the end. I'll micrometer this, I'll find a drill bit that's the same diameter, and then I'll drill from the back side just through this layer. I'll set my drill up so that it can't drill any deeper than it just breaks through this layer. And I'll inject adhesive at several points inside of here. And then I'll take some flat plates and I'll clamp this down with a flat plate on both sides. Now when you do the inside that you've drilled, the glue is going to push back out. So if you're using plywood as your plate on the back side, cover it with cling wrap. Saran wrap is the brand name. It's common here in the States. But it's that thin plastic wrap that you'd use to cover food in your refrigerator. That way, when the glue is set up and you take your backing board or backing plate off of here, the saran wrap will not stick to the wood glue. If you just put your piece of plywood against here and clamp it, you're going to be in serious trouble, because the glue will push back out of those holes somewhat, and you'll end up with a piece of plywood glued to the inside. So don't forget to put a piece of cling wrap or saran wrap or whatever you want to call it on your backing board that you clamp in here. I'm going to try to stay away from the letters. I'll drill above, below, that way I can clean off the adhesive when I'm done, and throw a light coat of stain inside, and we'll preserve the maker's marks on the inside. But that's the process. It's real straightforward. I've got these syringes. You can get them in all various sizes off of the internet. They're not expensive. You can buy the needle kits. These are for they use these a lot in integrated circuit assembly, automated assembly for circuit boards. They're adhesive needles. That's the word I'm trying to come up with. And they're readily available, different lengths, different shapes. If you need to get around a corner, if you carefully bend these, you can do it without kinking them. Like I say, you can get these in various sizes and diameters. What's something else I can tell you? I'm looking for, and I'm not seeing. Hang on, I'm going to look for something here. Okay, found it. If you find yourself a piece of plastic hose that will fit over there, then you can put this into your adhesive, your glue, and you can draw it up into the syringe like so. And then you can remove this and you'll have a clean tip to work with when you install your needle. Now, this has probably been used a dozen times already. Most wood glues are water soluble. If you have just a small can of water and cycle it in and out, in fact, you can save these. If you pump water back and forth through them, they'll clean up as well. A lot of these have been used several times. Again, they're not very expensive. You can use them as a one and done and throw them away, but I'm a typical New England Yankee. I have to preserve things. And aka cheap. We have to clean things up and reuse them. Again, you can throw them away. I'm not going to find fault with anybody that uses them as one and done, but this will make things a lot neater. Typically I'll dump glue into an old lid off of a spray can. That way I can just pour the glue into here, put this tip into it, draw it up into the syringe, and it's shallow enough that I can leave this standing in the pot like so, so that this end remains clean. I can handle it if I have to refill, and then I can put my needle back on here and clean, you know, and do my injection. And I'll just measure this and have my, you know, I'll have the drill bit the diameter of this, so that this is just barely a slit fit in. Only drill deep enough. You put a sleeve or something over your drill and stop it from going in. Okay, we're ready to start the process. I have my needle ready to go. This is, oh, I'm not sure what what number this is. These go in wire gauge sizes. This is probably like a number 16, I think. You get much smaller than that, you can get these down to 12 gauge, but if you get smaller than 16, these wood glues are fairly viscous and it can be hard to push them through. You can get it through, especially if you're using the little short guys. It'll push through all right. When you try to push through like a number 20 on this length, it can be very hard to push the glue through because of the viscosity. I have measured the depth. I've set my Dremel up with it stopped so that the drill will pass through the inside layer and into the cavity behind this ply. If you're doing this with a veneer like up here, you have to be very careful not to go too deep. You don't want to punch a hole through your veneer. I've got my glue stuff ready to go. I've got my hose on here so that I can draw the glue up into it. And I'm just going to drill a series of holes along the back so that I can inject the glue. I have my backer board all set with my cling wrap on it. I've taped it on here. When you do this, check with a good straight edge and make sure the board doesn't have a belly in it or a bow in it. If it does, put the high side on the inside so that when you clamp your board down on both ends, the center will touch down and then the board will bend flat. If you put it with the high side this way, you'll end up with a void on your veneer. Another warning is if you're just doing veneer, I've had a couple of cabinets where just the center had lifted for some reason, whether it was from moisture, humidity, I don't know. You want a backer board large enough to cover the whole area, because as you press the adhesive down, it's going to hydraulically lift the veneer further away from the bubble and push glue underneath that. You want to be able to compress the whole thing down so that the glue spreads evenly and you get, you know, a nice flat finish, for one. Two, if you try to do it with just a small piece of wood in the center, the danger is you're going to blow the veneer open from the hydraulic pressure as the glue spreads. So you want to make sure that the whole area is going to be covered. Now in this case, this is not a veneer, this is actually a ply, so there's not much danger of me doing any damage. But if it's just a thin layer, 1/32 of an inch of veneer, you can easily blast, you know, blow a hole in the veneer if you're not careful. Of course, if it's open all the way to the edge, that's not a problem, but you do want a backer board that'll cover the whole area. And, well, let's get started here. We'll drill a couple holes. I won't bore you with all of them, but all I'm going to do is run this in. Oh, and I'm using a collet to do this. Now, there are 3-jaw chucks available for the Dremel or the Ryobi or whatever your tool is. Sometimes they don't run very true, and the danger there is with these small diameter bits. This is 50 thousandths, this is 52 thousandths in freedom units. if they're not running true, these bits snap just like that. So you've got to be careful. I am using the collet, and I've got my fingers crossed. Should probably speed that up a little. And I'm just going to do that. I'm going to do a series of holes down here, a series down here, and a few down here as well. And these are what the collets look like. They're made in a little New England town of Whatchama. These are whatchamacallits. Okay, we've put a generous amount of adhesive in here. I'm just going to draw this up into the syringe. Makes it a lot cleaner and neater than trying, and it's faster, much faster than trying to do it through the needle. You can do it through the needle, but because of the viscosity, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes. And then I'll put my needle on. I'm going to slip it into the hole that I drilled and just apply a generous amount of adhesive in each one of the holes. And I'll do this all the way down the line. If you pull the plunger back, that won't happen. I'm trying to film and do this all at the same time here. Oh, that one's not going in for some reason. There it goes. If you bottom out, sometimes it won't go in. Maybe my needle's plugged. Let me try and check that. Nope, the adhesive's coming out. You can also inject in here, but you can only get just so deep. You're not going to get all the way to the back, of course. But if you feel so inclined, go ahead and squirt a little bit of extra adhesive in there. It'll end up coming out the back, but it's easily cleaned up with some paper towel. And while I'm doing this, I'll just grab some more adhesive out of the pot. Refill my syringe. Put my needle back on and continue. So now you know the process. And somebody's, I'm sure, going to comment on the fact that I'm using a small diameter versus the big one you saw earlier. You can generate a lot more hydraulic pressure with a smaller piston than you can with a big one for a given amount of force on the plunger. If you've got a lot of room, like here, you can use the big one if you're filling huge gaps, and I'll probably use the big one on the bottom where we had a long, wide gap to fill. But for these smaller holes and where you're trying to force adhesive in there, you'll get a lot more hydraulic force with a small plunger. And as I apply clamping force, I've got glue, of course, oozing out the end, which means the joint's pretty well filled. Clamp it down good and tight. A damp paper towel will clean up that wood glue fairly well. And at least we know we have pretty good coverage inside. The glue's covered most of the area. We shouldn't have much of an issue. Now I'm going to let this sit for a good 24 hours before I do anything with it, just to allow that adhesive to fully cure along the whole length of the inside. I don't know if it really takes that long. I like these big C-clamps. I wish I had one big enough to reach all the way to the center, and that's why I try to set it up so that my board has a belly going in so that it applies pressure in there. I should probably pick up some of those long vice grip type welding clamps that would reach all the way to the center or something like this, but it's not too often that I have to do this. This usually works out okay for me. But we'll just let that sit, and tomorrow we'll take the clamps off.